A sea turned into a graveyard, a single stroke that erased 60,000 Mongol sailors. This was not merely a battle, it was a calculated masterpiece of survival and domination. The victory became a perfect symphony of psychological warfare, flawless timing, the clever exploitation of terrain, and the seamless coordination of diverse forces. It marked the triumph of a small kingdom whose royal house had once risen from humble fishing villages, now daring to shatter the strongest army the world had ever known. But was this annihilation pure chance, or the culmination of decades of discipline and foresight? Yet this epic was later buried, its glory dimmed in the records, for it was a humiliation too great for the giant empire to preserve in full. Before we dive in, do not forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, hit like, and share in the comments what time you are watching and where from. Thank you for your support. And here lies the promise. The full story of this forgotten legend will reveal how a nation of fishermen brought the might of the Mongols to ruin. The mightiest empire on earth set its eyes on Dai Viet. Denied their greatest strength of feeding on the land of others, the Mongols faced an unexpected void. Fields were burned, villages emptied, and every supply route ambushed with ruthless precision. Without grain to seize or cattle to plunder, what advantage could their massive numbers truly bring? With nothing left to exploit, the Mongol army was forced to retreat in frustration, suffering heavy losses along the way. Dai Viet then rebuilt, scarred but unbroken, and from this crucible was born the hardened warrior spirit of the Tran dynasty, where every commoner could rise as a defender of the realm. 27 years later, after the fall of the Southern Song, the Mongols returned with a perfected host, an army unmatched in Asia. At this moment, the Yuan army was the strongest force, and within Dai Viet, the struggle between those who sought peace and those who demanded war was ended by the Great Assembly of Tran Hung. It was an extraordinary act of unity, where elders from across the land shouted with one voice to fight. Could any empire, no matter how vast, withstand a people so unanimous in resolve? The war that followed was brutal beyond measure. The royal court and the people evacuated Thang Long, leaving 600 warriors of the Holy Wing to hold the line for 7 days until every last defender fell. Their commander rejecting the offer of life in exchange for surrender. A princess was sent to Prince Togon, both as a bargaining chip and perhaps as a spy inside the Mongol camp. Villages fought to the death, some erased from the earth, while warriors carved the words "Sat That" into their flesh, vowing never to surrender alive. The scorched earth campaign continued, stretching the enemy thin. Mongol armies chased the two Tran kings from river to land, coming within moments of capture, yet always falling just short. At last, the kings reached the sea and escaped, and from that moment the tide turned. Dai Viet gathered its strength, struck ambush after ambush, and launched decisive battles on both land and water. The kings returned in triumph. At the heart of this victory was a simple yet brilliant design, splitting the vast Mongol host, isolating each garrison, and destroying them piece by piece before delivering the final blows. Prince Togon returned to Dadu in shame, and the great Admiral Omar carried home nothing but burning rage, the broken soul of a man once hailed as a legend. In 1287, just as Tran Hung Dao had foreseen, the Mongols prepared to strike Dai Viet once more. But this time the Tran dynasty was ready. For 30 years, the nation had endured, rebuilt, and sharpened its warriors into living blades. Spies planted in the north had long been at work, their reports now revealing the scale of the enemy's preparations. Much of the Yuan host would be former Song soldiers, endless ranks of infantry trained from slaves, so numerous yet disposable. Added to them were troops from Yunnan and Dali, the elite Yurshan horsemen whose cavalry skills rivaled the Mongols themselves, and even Tangut riders. Last time, the deadly combination of Keshik cavalry paired with heavy infantry had proven devastating in the open field. Now their navy would bring Goryeo sailors into the fight, horse archers undefeated on any battlefield. So many types of soldiers, each with strengths and weaknesses that commanders sought to measure, yet so many variables that complete certainty could never be reached. In truth, they gathered the finest warriors of Asia, so many types of soldiers, each with strengths and weaknesses we do not fully know. Denied or rendered meaningless was the Mongols' greatest source of power, their ability to feed and refit on conquered land. Fields were burned, villages emptied, and every supply route ambushed with ruthless precision. Without plunderable grain or livestock, what use is sheer mass when logistics have been stripped away? With nothing left to seize, the Mongol army was forced to retreat in frustration, suffering heavy losses along the way. Dai Viet then rebuilt, scarred but unbroken, and from that crucible arose the hardened warrior spirit of the Tran dynasty, where every commoner could rise as a defender of the realm. 27 years later, after the fall of the Southern Song, the Mongols returned with a perfected host, an army unmatched in Asia. At that moment, the Yuan force stood as the region's dominant power, and inside Dai Viet, the fevered debate between peace and war was settled by the Great Assembly at Dien Hong, an extraordinary act of unity in which elders from across the land shouted with one voice to take up arms. Could a policy of unanimity itself become a weapon, denying the invader the political fractures they usually exploited? The war that followed proved brutal beyond measure. The royal court and the people evacuated Thung Long, leaving 600 warriors of the Holy Wing to hold the line for 7 days until every last defender fell. Their commander rejected life in exchange for surrender. A princess was sent to Prince Tagun, both a bargaining chip and perhaps a planted witness within the Mongol camp. Villages fought to the death, some erased from the earth, while warriors carved the words "sat that" into their flesh, vowing never to surrender alive. The Scorched Earth campaign stretched the enemy thin. Mongol armies chased the two Tran kings from river to land, coming within moments of capture, yet always falling just short. At last, the kings reached the sea and escaped. From that moment, the tide turned. Dai Viet gathered its strength, struck ambush after ambush, and launched decisive battles on both land and water. The kings returned in triumph. At the heart of this victory lay a deceptively simple design: to split the vast Mongol host, isolate each garrison, and destroy them piece by piece before delivering the final blows. Prince Togon returned to Dadu in shame, and the great admiral O Mani carried nothing home but burning rage. The spirit of a man once hailed as a legend, now hollowed by humiliation. In 1287, as Tran Hung Dao had foreseen, the Mongols prepared to strike Dai Viet once more. But this time the Tran dynasty had been ready. 30 years of endurance had rebuilt and sharpened their warriors into living blades. Was it preparation, temperament, or the careful cultivation of institutions that made a people fight differently the second time? Spies planted in the north had long been at work, and their reports revealed scale and variety. Much of the Yuan hosts now included former Song soldiers, endless ranks of infantry trained from slaves, numerous yet expendable, augmented by troops from Yunnan and Dali, and by elite Jurchen horsemen whose cavalry skill rivaled even the Mongols, and Tangut riders as well. The lethal memory of Keshik cavalry paired with heavy infantry in the open field still lingered from past fights, and now the enemy's navy promised to bring Goryeo sailors into the fight, a mix of forces whose strengths and weaknesses commanders would need to weigh with cold calculation. In truth, they gathered the finest warriors of Asia, so many types of soldiers, each with strengths and weaknesses we do not fully know. We had one of the strongest navies in the region, but they were stronger still.
My lord,
And in that instant
the naval
between
engagement
life
has
and death,
concluded
it
in our
became
favor.
clear. Their massive ships moved with unnatural speed, too fast to be burdened with supplies. The real grain fleet must be trailing behind. Thus, a feigned retreat vanished among the islands, lying in wait for the slow, heavy supply ships. Omar raged, chasing the ghost of a fleet that had never truly left. Lives could not be thrown away recklessly. The true hero was not the one who died gloriously at the wrong moment, but the one who endured for the greater cause. A skilled fighter does not lose. A wise fighter survives even in apparent defeat. The moment of his humiliation, an apparent failure on the surface, became precisely the instant the enemy felt most secure. And that satisfaction, that arrogance, would later weigh like a millstone and drag them toward ruin. When news arrived that Tran Hung Dao had failed to halt Omani, the first phase of Tran Hung Dao's design seemed to collapse. He was summoned back at once to face punishment for his failure, yet Hung Dao begged for time, a few weeks only, so that he might redeem himself. Subscribe to learn battle strategies, the kind that turn defeats into victories and shape the fate of nations. Was this plea a confession of guilt or the bravado of a man buying the only currency that might save him? Time. But fate often favors those who seize opportunity. If Tran Hung Dao had faltered on the seas against Omani, then on land in the northwest, Tran Hung Dao faced the army of Lehi Na, marching down from Ban Nam. This force had been selected with deliberate care, for the UN believed Ban Nam troops would counter the mountains and climate of Dai Viet. Their homeland shared the same harsh terrain. They wore armor of woven rattan, cheap, durable, and light, granting them speed and endurance in the jungle. Speed and adaptation were their assets. But did those traits translate into strategic depth when supply lines and local alliances could be turned against them? From the borderlands, the mountain tribes were persuaded by Tran Hung Dao to stand with Dai Viet. They ambushed, harassed, and slowed the invaders at every step. Legend spoke of warriors who seemed to carry mountains on their shoulders, perhaps metaphorical, yet the phrase captured the crushing ambushes unleashed at Tuyen Quang. Countless skirmishes erupted, each designed not for decisive glory, but to bleed the invader slowly, to erode morale and stretch men and horses beyond repair. Lehi Na bore the weight of expectation. He was determined to secure victory with his Ban Nam troops. In those wooded mountains, the old rules change. You have archers, so do we. You strike from the trees, we strike back the same. Where Mongol cavalry had once reigned, the terrain neutralized hooves and favored infantry. Dali soldiers against the smaller, leaner forces of Dai Viet. The struggle became a brutal give and take, an endless chain of ambushes and lightning raids in the forest. Attrition fought as an art. Generals Lei Tach and Ha-An stood and fought to the last man, and like Tran Bin Trong before them, they chose death over surrender. For 3 long months, 18 battles unfolded, each a saga in itself, as Tran Hung Dao held Lehi Na at bay. At last, though Lehi Na broke through and forced his way past certain defenses toward Thung Long, the fall of Van Joen had shattered the original plan, and with Omani's mighty fleet now pressing, Dai Viet found itself encircled on all sides like fish trapped in a net. They could not afford to lose the initiative. When the net tightens, what does a commander choose? Gamble for a single spectacular reversal or trade ground to buy a different form of victory? They chose the latter. Short blades would strike against long ones. Asymmetry became the arithmetic of survival. The next move would be played at Thung Long itself, the capital freshly rebuilt, set to become a battlefield once more. A fleet was dispatched to block the enemy's advance, not to win a pitched naval battle, but to buy time, time to evacuate the court and the people. Though that fleet took heavy losses and was forced to withdraw, the delay proved decisive. Thung Long was girded for defense, and the flames of resolve burned in the hearts of the defenders. As expected, the enemy struck the city with fury, and the defenders fell back south, leaving ambushes on the roads of pursuit. Each step the Mongols took led them further. Their ranks thinned under relentless harassment. In the end, the court reached Tien Truong in safety, and from there, Tran Hung Dao turned to Plan B. The warboard shifted, variables rose and fell, but the spirit of Dai Viet endured, and so did the hope of victory. At Van Yon, Tran Hung Dao prepared to redeem his name. He concealed his fleet among the islands, waiting for the heavy supply ships of Truong Van Ho to pass. A true strategist wins without fighting when possible. The loose of fire arrows would turn the sky into a storm, and the reefs and tides would be the trap. He had waited for the moment when the grain fleet, slow and burdened, would sail into a narrow sea treacherous with reefs, where tides rose and fell like heavenly snares, surrounded on all sides with no escape. From every direction, the fleet he had raised surged forth, casting the great net upon that shoal of prey. The Sea of Quang Ninh lay, in effect, in his hand. Truong Van Ho fled in bitter rage, and was but a small fish in a larger sea of strategy. O Ma Ni, failing once again to capture the two kings, and repeating the humiliation of years before, burned with fury as he marched past the ancestral tombs of the Tran dynasty. A dark thought ignited in his mind. In this campaign, it was believed that the Mongols had prepared a nearly flawless plan. They advanced in winter with 3 separate armies. The Yunnan force was tailored for Dai Viet's harsh mountain terrain, expected to break through the northwest. Learning from earlier failures in supply, this time they relied on Dai Viet's river network for logistics. This was a double-edged plan. By concentrating supplies into one main route, they made protection easier. Yet did they not also risk everything on a single fragile artery? It reshaped the rules of the contest, neutralizing the scorched earth tactic that had crippled earlier invasions. Run and harass all you want. We can still sit firm, they must have thought. In reality, water transport was always faster, more stable, and safer than land. Second, they turned Dai Viet's naval strength into a weakness. The famous Mongol warboats, so mobile in earlier wars, now faced the sheer might of a rebuilt Mongol fleet. After 2 crushing defeats by Japan's Divine Wind, the Yuan Navy had been rebuilt with expertise from Goryeo and the Southern Song, 2 of the most advanced naval powers of the age. Could a fleet forged from the wreckage of earlier humiliation become even deadlier than before? The Mongol fleet of this era was Asia's strongest. It was a tight and almost perfect plan, forcing Dai Viet to confront them head-on. As long as river supply lines held, the Mongols could stand firm deep inside Dai Viet territory. Now attention turns to Dai Viet. At this time, their strength was nowhere near the Mongols. Compared to Champa or other Southeast Asian kingdoms, they were formidable. Yet against the Mongols, even all of Southeast Asia united might not suffice. From the first 2 invasions, Tran Hung Dao had drawn a vital lesson. Drafting masses of peasants created too many risks and drained future labor. In the Third War, he chose only elite troops with limited numbers. There were 2 great advantages to this. First was mobility. He could deploy quickly to strike or withdraw without waiting for levies to gather and without fear of being caught unprepared. Second, the implementation of strategy became more coherent and less variable. After the invasion of 1258, the Tran kings saw that further wars with the Mongols were inevitable. They accepted nominal surrender, but never foreign domination. Since war could not be avoided, they built a golden generation of warriors trained from childhood. If Tran Ich Tak created a political and cultural education system, then Tran Hung Dao devoted his heart to the military academy, Jiang Vuong, forging young generals educated in the world's military elite and adapted to Vietnam's context. By this era, Dai Viet had a generation of warriors trained from boyhood, with professionalism comparable to the Spartan agoge more than 1,000 years earlier. Every soldier carried discipline and combat skills above the regional average. Such strength was not born from chance or sudden patriotism, but from foresight patiently sown decades before. Was this not the very essence of grand strategy, to prepare long before the crisis arrives? They were ready to fight the giant from the north. Tran Hung Dao was a fascinating figure. The Asians spoke of yin and yang, of light within darkness and darkness within light. Well, Tran Hung Dao himself carried that mix of good and evil. Some sources record that Tran Hung Dao at times used his power to enrich himself, running questionable businesses under the symbol of the non la, the conical hat so tied to Vietnamese culture, and even collecting money from the poor. Were these the opportunistic habits of a man corrupted by power, or the flaws of a human figure who still carried the burden of defending a nation? His crimes, large and small, are many, from a scandalous love affair with another man's fiancée to treating people as instruments for his own purposes. He worked well with some, but not necessarily with others. Yet in the broader view, he was also a chivalrous general, ready to sacrifice himself for the realm. He possessed a natural gift not only in literature, but in the art of command. In literature, he was the hand that helped Tran Hung Dao compile the masterpiece of military thought known as the art of war. On the battlefield, he could win victories with fewer men, transform peasants into disciplined soldiers, and achieve results that others thought impossible. Most impressively, in the darkest moments when defeat seemed imminent, he had the rare ability to perceive the golden chance for reversal. Is that not the mark of a commander equal to the greatest in history? One who sees opportunity hidden within apparent disaster. Such flexible brilliance places him in the same league as Alexander the Great at Gaugamela. Tran Hung Dao emerges as a hero who feels very real, not a one-dimensional icon painted solely by propaganda. In cultural comparison, he carries shades of figures familiar to modern audiences. A bit of Loki, the adopted son with a mischievous edge, and a bit of Tony Stark with arrogance paired to genius. Yet whether it is Tran Hung Dao, Loki, or Tony Stark, all of them share loyalty to family and a drive to secure the greater good. Tran Hung Dao, by contrast, did not only appear as a commander, but as the very spirit of the war itself. His image became bound to the unity of the nation, for he was willing to set aside personal gain for the larger cause. The phrase, "the king and his officials in one mind, brothers in harmony, and the whole country contributes its efforts," was the keystone that allowed a small kingdom to defeat Mongol horsemen. He was a military genius whose bold strategies defined the age. The scorched earth policy, even at the cost of abandoning an entire capital to entrap the enemy, stands as proof of his calculated risk-taking. Behind the saintly general, however, was also a deeply human heart. During 8 years in the Forbidden Palace, he and Princess Tien Thanh grew close. When she was arranged to marry another, Tran Quoc Tuan made a fearless choice. He abducted her on the very night of her wedding. It was reckless, but it showed resolve. What is remarkable is that even the Mongols themselves called Tran Hung Dao a divine general. His strategy at the Bach Dang River became a classic case study in how the weak can overcome the strong, how stillness can defeat chaos. His enemies honored him not with words, but by quietly turning his methods into lessons for their own generals for generations afterward. For the Vietnamese, he is worshipped as a saint, not only for brilliance in war, but for his virtue, always placing the nation above self-interest. In Western frames of reference, he might be called the Hannibal of the East, a military genius who forced the greatest empire of his age to tremble by wearing it down and then striking the decisive blow. Yet one widespread mistake is to imagine the Mongols as brutal and simple-minded, using sheer force to overwhelm their foes. The truth is far more complex. The Mongol Empire was built on pragmatism, sophisticated management, and advanced military strategic thinking. They often prevailed with armies smaller than their opponents. If we think of empire building as akin to a startup,
Commander,
was not the Mongol
scouts report
state the
enemy
ultimate
movements.
disruptor,
How many?
beginning with
And where?
little capital and barely a tenth of the manpower of its rivals, yet triumphing through creativity and investment in the right methods? As nomads, they possessed an openness of mind, free from the rigid patterns of settled agrarian societies. They smashed Yangzhou's walls with Huihui trebuchets from the Islamic world, blinded Japanese samurai with Tetsuho bombs learned from the Southern Song, and crushed the princes of Rus and Kiev through psychological warfare. They terrified Europe by combining diverse troop types into one unified force, much as Hannibal Barca had done at Cannae. They expanded by building a cutting-edge logistics and postal system known as the Yam. At home, they secured stability by encouraging equality across ethnicity, religion, and background while promoting meritocracy. That is why many top Mongol generals were men of other nations, respected and empowered. The Mongols were not ignorant savages. They were the product of advanced intelligence. That's why they ruled the world for 162 years. They ruled the world for 162 years, but their defeat here became a lesson written in fire. What was the move that turned inevitability into collapse? That is where we go next. Before we continue, remember to like this video, share it with others, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Thank you for your support.